Welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf.
Hello and welcome to the Bail in the Midwest podcast, where we explore a variety of topics related to bail, pretrial release, and the criminal justice system in the Midwest. My name is Shane Rolf. I am the Executive Vice President of the Kansas Bail Agents Association, and I've worked in this field for the past 35 years. Now, our guest from a couple episodes ago, Jared Fishman, the author of Fire on the Levee, said in his book, and I'll quote, "In the U.S. criminal justice system, prosecutors are the most powerful actors. More than anyone else, they have the power to affect case outcomes, from who is arrested to who is incarcerated and for how long. They have an inordinate amount of power when it comes to determining whether the legal process is fair or not fair." Prosecutors, however, come in all varieties. The hardline law and order types, those like Mr. Fishman, who specialized in prosecuting police officers, and as if we have seen in various cities, so-called progressive prosecutors, which is to say, prosecutors who seem determined not to prosecute certain crimes. So while we have talked a lot about bail reform in this podcast, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the role of the prosecutor in the criminal justice system. My guest today is well suited to enlighten us. Vanessa Riebli has been practicing law for the past 25 years. 21 of those years were spent as an assistant district attorney in Johnson County, Kansas. In 2016, she was selected as the Kansas Prosecutor of the Year, and she has been on the short list of candidates submitted to the governor for possible judicial appointment on 3 separate occasions. She is currently with Bath Edmonds, one of the top flight law firms in this area, which focuses on criminal defense, and she is also running for district attorney in the upcoming election in Johnson County, Kansas. Vanessa, welcome to the podcast.
Shane, thank you for that introduction, and it's an honor to be with you here today.
So just have I missed any high points in that? I know I kind of just skimmed over your LinkedIn and your Google searches and stuff, and you got that. So what other wonderful things have you done that I failed to mention here?
Well, I was a career prosecutor until 2021, graduated from law school, worked in the Johnson County DA's office, 21 years. And then now I'm with Bath Edmonds. So that's pretty much it.
Well, let's walk through your background just a little bit.
Okay.
Your LinkedIn page said you graduated from Bethel College, which is a small school in Harvey County, Kansas, with a degree in accounting.
Accounting and business administration, yes.
Okay. So I guess first off, our very first guest on the podcast was Stephen Owens, who is a state representative from Harvey County. So how did you end up at Bethel? Was there a family connection? I know it's a religious school or a religious affiliated school.
Well, it's pretty simple. I followed a boy. My boyfriend, I had gone to Dodge City Community College on an athletic scholarship, and I was dating a football player, and he was the quarterback at Bethel. So I visited the campus. I liked the small size, and that's how I got there. And accounting degrees can be very difficult as you progress through college in the later years, and I loved the small school, and it was just a great atmosphere.
Well, and I know my daughter, when we were looking at colleges for her, we went to, she just missed being a national merit semifinalist. And so at that point in time, the University of Oklahoma was offering more or less full ride scholarships. And so we went to visit, OU just on the idea that, hey, they might pay for all this. And she's like, I hate this place. And it's like, oh, okay. Ultimately, she ended up at Washburn, and we'll talk about that a little bit more too as well. But so was the plan always to go to law school? I know a lot of lawyers, more on the civil side of things, business law, they tend to have accounting degrees. Was that the plan when you went there? Because I know
the plan was always to go to law school, but I grew up in a single parent family. There was not money saved for law school. And frankly, I was the first member of my family to go down that route. So I thought if I could get a degree in accounting and business administration, I could work for a few years, earn enough money to help me get into law school. That was a bad plan, because when you find out how much law school costs, there's no way to make enough money. But I worked in the accounting field for a few years, then moved up to the Kansas City metro area, actually worked for Lockton as an accountant, and then applied to law school within a year. And it was similar. I had to decide between Washburn and KU. And Washburn sold me, A, I got a scholarship, a larger scholarship, but B, they had a keg on the outside after our tour. And I thought, okay, this is more me than KU. So.
Well, I don't know about the keg, but my daughter ended up going to Washburn as well, and she just liked the smaller school.
Yes, my son goes there right now. He's a junior at Washburn. He wants to be an attorney, and that was the draw to him, a smaller type school. He graduated from Olathe West here, so he's used to very large, and I think he wanted smaller classes.
Just trying to think when both my niece and nephew went to Olathe West for a while, but then they moved. He probably would have been ahead of them. So no issue there. So I know a lot of times when we see these professionals, doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, oftentimes people are looking at these professions saying, okay, I'm going to get in this because I need to make some money. Particularly if you come from a less than well-off background, it's like, I want to become a professional because I'm not going to work, in a bar or, in some other, I think what Johnny Cochran called an outside job. You want to get an inside job. So what did make you decide to become a lawyer on that? Was it a money-driven thing or a calling?
No, if it would have been money driven, I would not have been a prosecutor, but it was a calling. So what I will tell you is I grew up in a domestic violence household in the 70s in rural Kansas, where, there wasn't a lot of help. So that started my passion to not only help myself, to help my family and help others. So I knew from a very young age that I wanted to work in the criminal justice system to be a voice for people who didn't have a voice, because growing up like that was difficult at times, and that's why I have such passion in the criminal justice side, whether it is, as a prosecutor or when I'm representing individuals charged with crimes, to make sure, the right outcome occurs.
So you sort of stole my next question because I was going to get into that, but that's okay. You do basically fall into the latter, of this is a calling, this is what I want to do, and the background comes into that. So let's sort of get into the role of a prosecutor. In some other countries, the judge is often the driver or investigator of criminal prosecution. You have a judge or a jury. Countries like France, Italy, Spain, the what we call the Romance language, countries when I was back in high school taking language classes, which is to say that those legal systems that were based on Roman law use an inquisitorial system of justice. So if you're charged, with a serious crime in, say, Spain, you really can expect the Spanish Inquisition. So poor joke there, but for Monty Python fans. But in the United States, we have an adversarial system. Can you kind of give us an overview of the role of the prosecutor in this adversarial system that we use here in the United States?
Well, I absolutely agree that the prosecutor is the most powerful person in the courtroom. And some people may hear that and think, well, no, that's the judge. He pronounces sentence. But the prosecutor decides, what is going to be charged from the very beginning of the case. Now, the prosecutor should not be involved in the investigation, but on larger cases, you're going to have knowledge, and then you decide what's charged. So whether it's a high level or if you go a lower level, that is a huge decision in the criminal case. And then also recommendations on bond. The bond is a very subjective decision, which is between the prosecutor's recommendation and then the judge. And then as you continue through the system, the prosecutor decides, am I going to offer a plea? And what kind of plea am I going to offer? Are we going to go to jury trial? And if we go to jury trial, am I going to file enhancements to increase the sentence? And then ultimately, at sentencing, the prosecutor, whether it's the plea or it's the result of a conviction, decides what to ask for. In our ethical rules, they call us ministers of justice. And that is what the goal should be. Unfortunately, it's not always, but that's what the goal should be. Because again, I believe that the prosecutor is the most powerful person in that courtroom.
So how far does that power go? What I've loosely referred to is the prosecutor's veto, and we're seeing that more often. One of my major complaints about Kamala Harris when she was the Attorney General of the state of California was a bail-related lawsuit where an activist group was suing the state of California, alleging that their bail bond system was unconstitutional. And Kamala Harris, as the Attorney General, decided, oh no, this is politically expedient for me to be on the other side of this issue. So I am, as an Attorney General, am not going to defend the statute. And she just simply walked away. And whereas it is, my feeling was always it's the job of the Attorney General of any particular state to defend the statutes of those states, whether you agree with them or not. You're an attorney for the people who passed that law. If the court then says that's no good, then that's the court's decision. But your job as an advocate is to advocate for the legitimacy of the statute, whether you really agree with it or not.
Right. Our job is to enforce the laws. And I have long said that I don't think a district attorney's office should be political because, that brings too many other, opinions and biases into the process. But our job is to enforce the law.
Well, and I know a lot of people will say that, but I think if I recall your history correctly, you've actually walked that walk. After Mr. Morrison left to become Attorney General and Phil Klein was appointed to replace him as the district attorney, and he did bring a very political mindset in there. It seemed like his entire focus was on abortion-related issues and all political issues as opposed to criminal justice. Right. I believe that is the stretch of time that you stepped away from the prosecutor's office.
That's correct. I stayed for about 4 months until I could find a job because I just didn't want to quit. I was a single parent. That was not possible. But yes, it was a very political atmosphere. I've told the story before. I was asked as a single mother, what do you make your son for dinner? I was asked my views on abortion. And there were 8 people fired. There were 7 of those were attorneys. And then some of the people that came in to fill those slots, you could tell they were purely political appointments. Like I had to explain to an attorney that I was training the difference between reasonable suspicion, probable cause, all of that type of information. So yes, I left because I was not going to work in that type of political atmosphere. When I worked for Morrison, I think there was a point where I didn't know if he was a Republican or a Democrat. And I think that's how it should be.
Well, I mean, one could argue that he didn't know that either, considering how he ran in those various races.
Fair point.
So how far does prosecutorial discretion extend? I mean, does it extend to just individual cases or entire categories of crime? Because that seems to be kind of a hot button issue now. I mean, you think, okay, I'm going to decide this particular case. Should I charge this individual or should I decide I'm not going to charge this type of crime at all?
Yeah. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. I don't think that you can just categorically say, I'm not going to charge this. On one of your podcasts, I heard them talk, there was a discussion about not charging misdemeanors. Right. That what automatically popped up to me was, well, you're going to eliminate thousands of domestic violence cases being charged per year. So what happens to, those victims? What happens to the children in those households? So I think that you should not categorically say, I'm not going to prosecute this. I think it's a case-by-case basis.
Okay. Well, no, I agree. I think that, we watched Ron DeSantis remove a couple of prosecutors in Florida who made these blanket assertions that we're not going to charge these crimes. And he's like, well, then you're not going to be the district attorney because that's your job. Obviously, it was politically motivated from the governor's office on those, but still, if you're not going to enforce the law, or you're going to sit there and say, I'm going to overrule the legislature and the people and the government and every other branch of government, aspect of government that's determined this should be illegal, should you really be the person enforcing those laws? So we'll talk about progressive prosecutors in a minute here, but so how do the administrative choices, the discretionary choices that the prosecutor makes, how do they impact the community as a whole?
Well, it depends. So, Johnson County is unique because we have so many different levels of law enforcement, or so many different cities of law enforcement. So you get all types of cases that are sent. So really the district attorney needs to have a policy in place. You may charge a particular crime, but your plea guidelines may be such that they may not be as strict. For instance, possession of marijuana cases, that's all over the board right now with the different jurisdictions in Kansas. Possession of marijuana is still, it is not legal in Kansas. What's interesting is if you get stopped with marijuana, In a city, you get a ticket. If you get stopped by Johnson County, you go to jail. So, decisions have to be made that you have to enforce the law, but then the question becomes, how does that affect the community? Just like with domestic violence cases, there's a probable cause standard that it's a mandatory arrest if the officer has probable cause. So, those are cases that are handled at the district court level. Some jurisdictions push those down to municipal court, but it's important to have a unified policy on that because there has to be equitable treatment with cases. And that's why I brought up the marijuana, because it's not equitable treatment, city court versus district court. And that can lead to issues, with different community members. Like, why is my son incarcerated for 2 days because he was stopped on a highway versus his friend who, just got a ticket? I don't think that really answers your question, but
it is another topic of interest because I'm the legislative chair for the Kansas Bailiffs Association, so I follow the stuff legislative, and I know that Sheriff Hayden, the last couple years, had been pushing a bill that would allow sheriff's office and the highway patrol to issue notices to appear, which is essentially that short form citation for a marijuana offense that the city courts can do now, but that the county courts, the district court cannot. And for people that aren't familiar with Kansas, the sheriff's office and the highway patrol, those arrests would funnel into district court, whereas if you're arrested by a city police officer, it's going to probably be funneled through municipal court, depending on the severity of the charge, because those municipal court arrests could be focused up to the district attorney's office, depending on the severity, depending on the policy of the district attorney's office, like for instance, domestic violence. You did point out something about Johnson County, and I'm probably monologuing here a little bit, but Johnson County is one of the few districts that actually has that uniform control that all domestic violence cases are charged at the district court level. So there is that continuity. So whereas, in Kansas City, Kansas, the county just north of us, they have sort of a family court, but it's all done through municipal court. And, you might not spend any time in jail at all, or a couple hours and you're back out again, and you don't have that separation. And so you get these repeat offenses. So let's jump ahead here. We hear this term progressive prosecutor, Soros prosecutor. So how I've got my own definition of that, but how do you define the progressive prosecutor? Because there's some support for that line of thinking.
Right. My observations would be those are more blanket policies on different types of crimes, different individuals. Whereas my position as a prosecutor is it is more of a case by case, county by county type evaluation. To make a blanket statement that we're not going to prosecute misdemeanors or that we're not going to prosecute property offenses, that's not how the criminal justice system works. You can have somebody that commits a misdemeanor domestic violence, like I said, and if you're not going to prosecute misdemeanors, what happens to that victim? And then what happens to those children? And same with, property crimes. The issue like Oak Park Mall type situations where we have individuals traveling across the country committing organized retail crime. That's a lot different than a young kid shoplifting like a couple $100 worth of something. When you have career criminals that may have extensive violent crime convictions. So when you just make a blanket, we're not going to prosecute X or Y, I think that can hurt your community. You need to understand, that the crime statistics in your community, what is going on, what needs to be addressed. You have to be knowledgeable. And I think sometimes things are just said for political gain without thought of consequences.
Well, and yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And the bail issue itself has become, a political football back and forth, and when it really shouldn't be that way. But when you brought up property crimes, and one of the things that's always struck me about property crimes or failure to prosecute property crimes is that's one of the functions of government, is to provide an environment where people can thrive and where businesses can perform. I mean, you cannot have an open business if anyone can walk in and just take your product. Or you're going to have to essentially create this barred, area where everything's locked up and you can't really shop. It's going to affect your bottom line. And then your argument is, well, why do I pay taxes? What am I getting out of the government? I'm just going to close this place down, because I can't afford to keep this open. So, that decision making seems like if you're coming from the prosecutor saying, okay, we're not going to charge this, or we're just going to cite and release these people. I think that probably the podcast you were talking about was when we talked to Ken Good. I mean, you're talking about implosion of these areas, particularly inner city areas, which we don't really have so much here in Johnson County. But I'm seeing in Johnson County an uptick in things, in crime, and I'm seeing a downtick in keeping people in custody. Douglas County, for instance, has essentially eliminated its bail bond industry. I just saw this 2 days ago when I was looking at someone who had a detainer here, looking at their Douglas County case because they had a warrant from Douglas County. Well, they failed to appear, but they failed to appear, and they gave them a signature bond on the warrant. Mm-hmm. What was the point of that?
And, what I'll say about property crimes too, as well, is, Johnson County is starting a drug court here. It's a specialty court. And when you listen to the presentations, and from my own experience, a lot of property crimes are fueled by drug abuse. And, those property crimes are committed in order to get money to buy drugs. So that's how, the judge that's in charge of the drug court talks about a lot of these cases is these property crimes get people into the specialty court to help them address the root issue of what's occurring. So again, when you make, blanket policy decisions, you may be missing the why of it, right? And the opportunities to help people, to get them into drug treatment and to stop the behavior.
Well, this book that's behind me, What's Killing America by Jason Rantz, just came out. He talks about that, and this relates to drugs. People will sit there and claim, well, the war on drugs has failed. Well, yes and no, but has it really? I mean, one of the points that's there is people who use drugs can't hold jobs. Drugs are still not free. Whether they're legal or not, they're still not free. So you've got to get those things. And so at the very base level, if you're stealing stuff to pay for your drug addiction, not to mention all the downstream crime that comes from that, because, you're not always, the most stable person in the world when you're on drugs too. And so violent crimes come out of that. There's arguments that some of these drugs cause different forms of psychoses that then lead to more violent crime and safety in the community. I guess, what is your thoughts or policy on drug decriminalization or legalization or the war on drugs itself? You sort of touched on that, but if you could enlighten us.
I think Johnson County is taking a step in the right direction. We're finally getting a drug court. We have been surrounded by jurisdictions that have drug courts to address these issues, and it's now 2023, and it's just occurring. So we were far behind the times. But, I have several clients who have drug addictions, and it can be challenging to get them into drug treatment, to find ways to address the behavior. And it leads to a lot of bond violations, as you know, sure. And they're coming in and out of the court system. So I think it's important to address the drug issues, especially now with fentanyl, all the different deaths we're seeing related to that, to address these issues. The drug possession cases are controlled by the legislature. A lot of them are going to be probation type cases, mandatory treatment. Those are the lower level cases where, we can hope to get in and have intervention. And then we have the drug distribution cases, and those need to be, addressed, I think, at a more rigorous level when we have individuals who are, dealing these drugs. Not to say that drug possession is okay, because I've had several clients whose lives have, just gone south because of their continued drug usage. And it's not just the client, it's the family. It affects the community. So whether it's the parents or the kids and, what's occurring in the household, we can't act like there's not a drug problem. There is a drug problem, and it needs to be addressed. One of my hopes is that, there would be a uniform plea policy in the DA's office on possession of marijuana, because those are all over the board, and it's hard to explain to clients why somebody has a probation while others are just fined and released. So again, I'm a big proponent of equal justice. It's important to try to have as much uniformity as you can.
Well, and I'll get back to this marijuana thing just on a touch, because I kind of want to go to the drug thing a little bit more. But on the marijuana thing, I've noticed here of late, particularly since Kansas, Missouri essentially decriminalized and then have an American medical marijuana regimen there as well. It just seems like the people who are, the people who are getting arrested for marijuana at the district court level, I mean, it's simple possession, and they spend the night in jail and they see the judge the next day and get a bond set. But it is always, I mean, 99% of the time, those are signature bonds, which is fine with the exception that, well, this person is from Texas. They're just passing through. So, I mean, what was the point of even making this arrest? Because maybe they'll come back, but the odds are you're just letting this person from out of state go. I mean, we have these calls from people that were, well, I was just on my way from Colorado to Ohio. Well, I'm sorry, I need somebody locally here to help guarantee your bond. And then they go to court and the court's like, oh, you can sign yourself out. That doesn't seem like an individualized determination.
Right. I have a lot of college kids who get arrested, on K-10 going back from, 4th KU, Johnson County, or going south to colleges. So I have a lot of 19 and 20-year-olds who may have a medical marijuana license in Missouri, may have lawfully purchased it, but then they're caught in Kansas. So it's an interesting observation.
Well, on the drug court, I know you had referenced some of the podcasts we've done with Ken Good, but Ken talked about how the criminal justice system is often the poor man's rehab. And I've had this conversation with clients and families and stuff. And, you call mom, and mom's like, I'm not getting him out. If I get him out, he's just going to go get high again. And I've had multiple people just decline to become involved, not because they didn't have the money, not because they couldn't, not because there's any financial difficulty in posting the bond. They just weren't getting that person out because they knew that person was going to go back to that same behavior if they got out. And then, 3 weeks later, they go in front of the judge and the judge gives them a signature bond and they're back out doing the exact same thing again. So, I mean, I guess that's an argument for the possession charges, in that it does, the drug court itself, but it does give the courts and the system some degree of control or some degree of influence over your behavior. I mean, because a lot of this stuff that we do, we're not sitting here locking up people, for possession charges, but we are trying to influence their behavior to get them, to give a hammer, I guess, a negative reinforcement to get away from that particular behavior.
No, and what I would say, a lot of my clients and a lot of people that I prosecuted, what it comes down to is when they decide to stop is going to be when they stop. And a lot of times that's when they hit rock bottom. And I have a lot of family members who will, bond clients out, even that they know the behavior is going to continue. And what I often say is by the time you get into the criminal justice system, many things have failed prior to this. But, to say that we can force drug treatment, I've had a lot of clients, and as a prosecutor too, go through the therapeutic community, which is a 6-month inpatient treatment program here in Johnson County. And I had, when I was a prosecutor, I had defendants tell me, well, that's where I learned how to get my drug hookups when I was going to get out of the therapeutic community. And then I've had other, people that I've prosecuted and clients say, no, it made a huge difference in my life. So it comes down to when that individual person decides to stop, and what tools can be given to them through the community and through probation to help them stop. Because sitting in jail, what I find is my clients will sober up and dry out, but if they don't have the tools, because eventually you're going to get out, right? Unless you commit some type of, high level violent, crime, you're going to get out, and you've got to get the mechanisms in place, the coping mechanisms, to try and help combat that drug usage. And I don't know what the formula is. I've seen clients do very well with the tools they've learned through drug abuse classes on probation, and then I've seen others that just completely fail.
So one of the books behind me is Thinking About Crime by James Q. Wilson. And one of the things that he talks about in there is that the two best methods for deterring crime are the likelihood of getting caught and the swiftness and certainty of punishment. That's for all kinds of criminal activity, not just drugs or property crime or anything else. So talk to us about what you think, how prosecutorial choices affect the overall deterrence that we're able to provide in a criminal justice system.
Well, you mentioned that the second point was the timeliness, and I think that is huge because we have many cases that sit in the district attorney's office, and I see this from a defense perspective, that are not charged for 6 months to over a year. And that type of delay in charging, it's not safe for the community, and then it's not a deterrent to the person that's committing the crimes. So the quicker the criminal justice system can get involved, and whether that's, bond conditions that may require a mental health examination or a substance abuse evaluation. In my practice, a lot of times, once charging is so far down the line from when something occurred that we get them into treatment. So there's not that delay. So it's very important that justice happens swiftly, right? Especially for the victims of the crimes. And as far as the prosecutorial role in charging, tell me again, what was the first point? What was the question? Sorry.
The likelihood of getting caught. So that would be the police response, and the swiftness and certainty of punishment.
Right. No, I agree that it's with anything. If you think you're going to get caught, no matter what it is, maybe that will deter the behavior.
Right.
But you have, there's some types of crimes. I think of domestic violence it's not being reported. And that's why we try to encourage people to report, right? Because if you're allowed to continue that conduct, it's not going to stop. And the same with the drug usage and the drug distribution. If it's allowed to continue, it's not going to stop. And I know that sounds very simplistic. But again, I just go back to the timeliness when the crimes occur as to when it's going to be charged. I think that is key in the criminal justice system. You can't let somebody wait a year and a half to be charged and think that that's safe for our community.
Well, and we have two points there. One, simple isn't always bad. Sometimes simple solutions are the best solutions there. They're easy to understand. You've done this is the consequence. It's very simple. There's a linear connection between A and B. The other one is the length of time between charging. I mean, we see this happen all the time on various charges where, you send drugs off for testing and then the case doesn't get charged for 6-8 months, or you have some sort of like a felony DUI that then gets charged, was charged as a misdemeanor initially, and then gets bumped up to the state level as charged as a felony. But 6-8 months later, that charge comes to pass, and now we have to be on house arrest with some sort of alcohol monitor. It's like, well, what about the last 6 months? Where was public safety there?
Right. And that's why I talk about the delay in charging. And it may not just be waiting for a lab test to determine the blood alcohol content. It could be that it's just sitting on the prosecutor's desk. So it's important to, target the types of crimes that need to be given the most attention. A lot of the crimes that I see sitting are special victims unit crimes. Children have been sexually assaulted, child pornography cases. They're just sitting. And it is ridiculous to believe that the behavior is going to stop.
Well, and oftentimes, without any impediment from the criminal justice system. That behavior not only is not going to stop, it's going to increase in severity. I mean, domestic violence it generally doesn't get better over time.
No, it does not.
I mean, that was one of the arguments for a specialized domestic violence court here, was that, we would have early intervention on these types of charges, to prevent these domestic violence murders and other things down the road. Okay, so let's talk about bail reform just a little bit. This is a bail bond podcast, so we should probably touch on a little bit. Generally, when we talk about bail reform, what we're talking about is a move away from any sort of financially secured pretrial release. There's an argument there that this is just unfair, that people of means will get out and people without means won't. I think that's probably, as we talked about simplicity, I think that's a little too simple, because that's generally not the way it works. You don't just go, I've got $20 in my pocket so I can get out. generally, as in a bail situation, financially secured bail, you have to enlist the support of other members of the community. You have to get your friends, your family, your coworkers, some other people involved to come take accountability for you, which is one of the reasons why I think it works. But what are your thoughts on the role of unsecured release in these spiking crime rates that we're seeing in these areas that have gone to these zero bail policies?
Well, we don't have that in Johnson County. There are PR bonds, but there's not zero bond policies. But what I would say about bond is it's so subjective. And it's, the prosecutor makes a recommendation and to a judge, and, there's not a lot of information known at that time, other than the level of the crime, and a bond is set. And what I see is bonds may start out very high, but then they can be greatly decreased, as we have seen in some of the cases that we have worked. But I can tell you for my clients, bond can be important, especially when it comes to monitoring drug usage. I have clients that if they know they're going to be monitored, they're not using.
Right.
And I have had clients that have been removed from, say, pretrial supervision or house arrest. And then especially in the beginning stages, where that gets removed and then the behavior starts again. So, when it comes, and Johnson County has a very robust house arrest program and pretrial services. And I would say that's beneficial to my clients in some cases, but also to the community, especially in DUI cases. And I can't imagine a scenario where you would have a signature bond with no conditions on a DUI case. But those are some of the most important public safety cases that we have, right? We need to make sure that there are conditions in place where things, that they're absolutely being monitored.
Well, and this is, get a side story here. I believe my former stepfather may have actually made it into a training video that the Johnson County District Attorney's Office uses for DUIs. That former, it wasn't stepfather, it was basically my mother's husband for a time, but he had a severe alcohol problem. But he could control that when he chose. He spent lots of time on house arrest, lots of time on alcohol monitoring. But I recall distinctly, he finished his house arrest, his alcohol monitoring, and he dropped off the equipment. And on the way back home, he stopped and got some at the liquor store to get things up. Right. So it wasn't that, I couldn't stop if I didn't want to. It's just, I don't want to, and when this hammer is hanging over my head, I can stop. Now, one of the arguments against bond is, is the same, and you've mentioned that before, people are going to get out eventually. And so then I know that a number of career prosecutors, the Chris Christies of the world, often warm up to the idea of preventive detention. It's what's used at the federal level in large measure. I mean, if you've listened to some of these podcasts, we've talked about how it used to be that 75% of people in the federal level got out on some sort of pretrial release. Mm-hmm. When preventive detention became an option under the Bail Reform Act in 1984, that number has flipped on its head. 75% of people remain in custody for the duration of their charges at the federal level. I'm curious about your thoughts of the use of preventive detention, especially now that you've kind of seen this issue from both sides, from both the prosecutorial side and the defense side.
Yeah, it's interesting as a prosecutor, you see the facts in the report, the criminal history, and then when you get on the defense side, you find so much more about what is going on, what has led us to be here. And, I have clients that I believe need to stay in custody, not only for the community safety, but for their own protection. And then I have other clients who need treatment, whether it's mental health treatment or drug treatment. And then I'm an advocate with the judges to let's decrease the bond, but let's set bond conditions to help this individual. And if they don't meet those bond conditions, we know where they're going to end up, right? But it's really, and I sound like a broken record, but it is a case-by-case basis, not with the high level, violent crime. We know that for the community safety, people need to stay incarcerated. It's when you get down to the lower level that I don't think you can make blanket assertions about what should occur.
Well, there's a huge middle ground. I think we can all agree, the murderers and rapists, they're going to, if they don't remain in custody pending trial, they're going to need really serious, conditions or bond amounts or something
Right.
that essentially work as, preventing them from getting out. And then there's all the people that, don't really have any sort of criminal record. And okay, we can let these people go. But there's this large area in the middle, people who have priors, people who've been in trouble before. Maybe they're not serious priors, but they're repeat offenders. They're coming back into the system. How do we deal with those people? And if we just, snap our fingers and kick them back out, well, then we get this over again. If we lock them up, there's downsides to that as well.
Right. Right. No, there's no perfect answer. And I have clients and I will tell them, look, you need to stay in custody. You are not doing well on bond. Not only do you risk hurting, others, you are not doing what you need to do to get the treatment, and you end up with new charges, and we have even a bigger hole than when we started, and then I have other individuals who may be charged with higher level offenses that really would benefit from services in the community, and should, in my position, is that they shouldn't be incarcerated. And part of that too is, we've suspended statutory speedy trial in Kansas. It's going to come back into play in March of 2024. So there's a longer delay from charging to when this trial or disposition may occur. And oftentimes what I tell clients is, look, if you get out on bond and you do well, that is going to help you at sentencing. And that could be the difference between going to prison versus being out in our community. So there's lots of carrots like you talk about, but you will see that I am, we evolve, right? I'm sure when I started as a prosecutor, it was jail, 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 felony, felony, felony. And as I have evolved and tried higher level, cases, you come to see that you need to try to get services to help people. And ultimately it may fail and they may end up incarcerated. I've had clients where I thought this is going well, drug treatment's going well, and next thing I know, I see them on the first appearance list. So, but I think it's important that we advocate for treatment, realizing that sometimes it's just not going to work. And people will end up incarcerated for the length of their criminal case from charging to disposition.
Right. Well, let's go back to, let me just touch on the drug thing one last time here. The What's Killing America book, Jason Rance talks about, one of the decriminalization strategies in the Pacific Northwest was to try and follow the Portuguese model. The idea that we're, yes, we may, charge you or give you a ticket, but we're going to force you to go into treatment. And if you don't go into treatment, well, then the incarceral option becomes a factor. But what was happening in the Pacific Northwest was, they made that threat, but they weren't actually following up on it. I think his argument was that they'd issued 3,500 citations for these drug possession charges where people were required to come in and report and start getting into a treatment program, and only, less than a dozen had actually followed up on that. They just, hey, nice piece of paper, thanks a lot.
Right. You have to have the treatment program available.
Right.
I have a lot of clients who cannot afford the evaluation fee, let alone the treatment program. So if that's a requirement, we have to have something in place.
Well, and I guess then it becomes a question of funding. One of the issues you brought up there, as far as speedy trial and the ability to get people charged quickly, is an issue of being able to have a well-funded district attorney's office. Johnson County is not as bad as other places. Right. I'm familiar in my role in the KBAA. I'm familiar with kind of what's going on in Sedgwick County as well. Sedgwick County routinely does what they call whopping out, or basically, release without prejudice. In other words, you're booked in and you spend, that 48 hours in custody. At the end of that 48 hours, we don't have you charged, you're out the door. Now, They have a pre-bond sort of thing that Johnson County never adopted, that you can, post bond and get out on that. Yes. But that's, one of the things I've always liked about Johnson County is that, hey, we arrest you and we can, if you arrest you on a probable cause basis, you're either going to get charged or you're going to get let go. Now, sometimes you get let go and charged later on, but not every county is like that. And that's a funding issue.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I say that justice is geographical. Since I've been a defense attorney, I travel to a lot of different jurisdictions. In Johnson County, if you're arrested, a charging decision is going to be made within 48 hours. Whereas in other jurisdictions, there could be a probable cause finding and no bond set, and you could sit there we had a client sit for almost a month before he was charged. But those jurisdictions, it's interesting to me that you're arrested, you're not charged with a crime, but you have to post bond. I had a family member in Douglas County that went through that. He was not charged, but he had to post bond, and then just show up to court every 30 days to wait to see when they would be charged. And in the meantime, he's getting into more trouble.
Right.
So again, it goes back to timely charging, but we are very lucky in Johnson County. Our DA's office is very well funded. I go to other jurisdictions where they can't hire prosecutors because the pay is so low. We have a crime lab in Johnson County that is very robust and have, just an incredible capacity on our cases. Other jurisdictions are not so lucky. So no, I completely agree. And it goes back to justice is geographical, depending upon where you land. And that makes a huge difference in bonds, right? A
Sure.
bond in Western Kansas, where everybody knows the person in that community, is going to be very different from, here in Johnson County, where they may have been a member of the Johnson County community, all of their life, but it's different. Justice is geographical.
Well, and there's a different focus on some of the, in like on the I-70 corridor, you may have these people that are, have drugs get caught coming out of Colorado with marijuana, pounds of marijuana. Those bonds are going to be significantly higher in Western Kansas than they might be if you're caught here, just because, it's a larger area. So let's talk about misdemeanor cases just a little bit. We'd mentioned that before. We don't want to walk away from misdemeanor cases. Ken Good, who I refer to a lot because he does another podcast on bail related stuff, said that misdemeanor cases were often the training ground for future felons. And if you train people that it's okay to commit misdemeanors, then ultimately you'll end up with more felonies, because those people, just like, domestic violence doesn't get better over time, it gets worse. Right. Criminal activity tends to get better over time, up to a point. People do tend to age out of criminal behavior, but up to a point, it just gets progressively worse. Given that in a county like Johnson County, with several large cities and multiple municipal courts and police departments, all of whom have their own policies and procedures, for all practical purposes, no one in charge in municipal court is actually required to post bond anymore. So you don't have that deal. I mean, we only post bonds at a municipal court at this point when somebody's already missed court. And then maybe not even then, they might circle back out again in just a few hours. How does the district attorney ensure that all these municipal courts are doing their jobs?
Well, we're going to talk about this later, but I am actually going to be running for district attorney here in Johnson County in 2024. And one of the things that I want to institute is, a more robust communication between municipal prosecutors and the district attorney's office, and expand that out. I also want to include Wyandotte County, Jackson County, Douglas County, all the counties, Miami counties that surround us. But there need to be discussions, especially like DUIs, trying to figure out as quickly as they can, is this a misdemeanor or is this a felony, and having a coordinated effort. There used to be that. I'm not seeing that as much anymore. Same thing with theft cases, those aggregate to felony level, but we need to have more uniform policies and discussions.
Well, I'll get into. I've got one more question about that. Then, actually, I'll just leave to this one. So, as voters, if our goal is to have a safe community, what should we be looking for when we select a candidate for district attorney?
Well, experience.
Right.
I think it's important to have walked the walk to be in this. I've been, a prosecutor for over 21 years, but also another advantage I have is I've been on the defense side, and I think to have the best overall view of the criminal justice system, you need to have been on both sides. And I have prosecuted high-level, everything from high-level violent offenses to where, I had to have protection for myself and my family, down to, misdemeanor drug crimes, speeding tickets. And, my goal is always, number one, is to protect the community. But then also, what can we do so this individual is not going to be back here again, right? One of the things that is missing from the DA's office are these specialized units. The office was reorganized in 2020, and they will tell you that these units still exist, sex prosecution, white collar, drug units, but they don't, based upon how the district attorney's office functions. And I think in order to best serve our community, you have to have these prosecutors who are experts in child abuse cases, in domestic violence cases, to protect our community. And I feel like right now, our DA's office is more of a factory, just in and out, in and out. And that's not how it should be. And I think there should be more transparency. If I become DA's office, if I become the district attorney, on our DA website, we're going to have statistics. What crimes are being committed, what crimes are being prosecuted, what are the dispositions, how many are going to jury trial, what is being no charged, because the community needs to know what is occurring within the DA's office, and that transparency is just not there.
Well, I mean, the current DA is not nearly what I would call a progressive prosecutor. I think we if we're looking for local areas, I think we can just look north of us and get that sort of reaction where there's not good cooperation between the DA's office and the police don't feel that they have someone with who's supporting them in the prosecutor's office in that county. So I guess, aside from the specialized units, and since we are talking politics, what would you do differently than what the current office is doing, other than, just here's some transparency and we'll have these specialized units?
Right. And it's interesting being on the defense side, I didn't see all of this when I was in the office, but one thing I've noticed is how cases are being handed off from prosecutor to prosecutor. I have cases that are on their third or fourth prosecutor. How is that justice for that victim? How is there a continuity in prosecution for that case? The delay in charging, and I've talked about that before, but to me, that is a huge issue. We cannot have high-level felonies sitting on prosecutors' desks that are not being charged. So we would definitely institute policies that would require review. If a rape case is on a prosecutor's desk for over 30 days, we need to look at that and find out why. Does it need to be sent back to the police department for further investigation, or is it just sitting there because the prosecutor is busy, maybe doing a different type of crime? Right. It's interesting. When I was after that reorganization, I had homicide cases, I had child sex cases, but I was spending a lot of time, working on motions to suppress for misdemeanor drug stop cases on K-10. It was not a good allocation of resources. When I was in that office, I looked at my mentors. You will see many of them now are judges, are very successful defense attorneys. Right. And what happened within the last 5 years or so, we have had numerous experienced prosecutors leave that office for various reasons. And what I see is the training is not occurring with the new prosecutors. You can't just give somebody a notebook and say, hey, this is how you're a prosecutor. You need to have mentoring programs. You need to have attorneys sitting with the younger attorneys and teaching them how to prosecute. I would learn by sitting in court and watching, but most importantly, having somebody mentor me. So I know it's difficult to recruit prosecutors right now. You just need to look at all the different prosecutorial offices around at all the openings. But the prosecutors that we have, we need to do better. We need to train them. Also, I will say we need to rebuild relationships with law enforcement. What I constantly hear is prosecutors won't return my calls. Prosecutors won't return my emails. How do you successfully prosecute a case when you're not working with your case detective, when you're not working with your law enforcement? Justice is not going to happen when we walk into a courtroom unprepared.
Well, I mean, and trial by fire, I guess, works over time. But in the meantime, how many lost cases and how much damage has been done in the meantime if you're not putting people in positions where they can be successful?
Yeah, I don't like the trial by fire. I do not like that. I mean, maybe in lower level, like traffic court, speeding tickets, things like this. I'm just speaking off the cuff, but what I see is a lot of younger prosecutors that are trying specialty high level cases that don't have that experience, and they don't have somebody sitting with them. And that is not how it should be. That does not protect our community. And that leads to a lot of, you start to look at jury trial stats. There have been a lot of not guilty jury verdicts. Or if you look at plea dispositions and see what's happening. So there has to be better training in that office.
Well, and just spitballing here, and this is just throwing this out here, but I know we've looked at this in other professions, like in the medical profession, trying to get doctors into rural areas. Is there something that can be done at the state level, particularly, as you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, law school's not cheap. Is there some way to get a service type component to get people in to serve a few years as a prosecutor at the state level for some sort of student debt forgiveness?
They do have that. They do have that. So I believe I did not have that. I was too old for that. But several of the prosecutors that I supervised, I think it's 10 years. And if it's 10 years in community service, then your debt is wiped out, which is huge.
Yeah.
My student loan payment, I think I started as a prosecutor at like $40,000, and my student loan payments were like $600 to $700 a month.
Boy, it's killer.
Living in Johnson County, that is very difficult. So that's why a lot of my classmates would go to civil firms and could make so much money. But, to me, being a prosecutor is where you can best help your community. You're not going to make a lot of money doing it, but you can go home at night and feel good about what you've done.
Well, and I've said in several podcasts that I think that the criminal justice system is one of the pillars upon which a society is built. If you don't have people, constantly, watering that tree of justice, not with blood, but I mean, with justice, you're going to have societal breakdown. So as a final question, we'll wrap this up here and let you get back to work. All of us who work in the criminal justice system have to be mindful that the work can have a negative impact on us. We might refer to a case as just a domestic battery, as like in your family history, because we see these cases regularly. Almost a couple thousand of them come through every year, and that's just domestic battery. But the impact of that case on the victim can be life altering. So how do you personally avoid becoming jaded and hardened from working in this system?
Right. It's funny. You said I wrote down jaded, because that's exactly what happens. And I think that can skew prosecutorial viewpoints because they become so jaded, they're just going to reoffend, or, this is just going to happen again. But my energy, and I will be honest, there are times when I go home and I'm like, I don't know if I can do this anymore. Especially as a defense counsel, I feel like I'm, 50% attorney, but then 50% mental health counselor, trying to work through this, and at the end of the day, it's, I hope that I have enough strength for the next day to help people. And, you have to have different things in your life, whether it's family, exercise, faith, things like that help get you through that. But becoming jaded is one of the worst enemies of a prosecutor. Also, ego. I would talk to a lot of the prosecutors that I mentored, and that having a big ego is one of your worst enemies in the courtroom, because you tend to overlook and not prepare. But there are times when I am jaded, but you have to remember that each case matters. And I think I look back at my childhood and remember it's not just domestic violence. These are they have long-term effects. And we have to be mindful of that. And we can't just throw away people, say, oh, they've been using drugs for 20 years. There's nothing we can do. No, if that's your attitude, then maybe you shouldn't be sitting in that prosecutorial chair, because we have to keep moving forward. And, my big thing every day is, I want to help people. And I know that sounds simplistic, but really, isn't that what we're here for? To help each other through this.
Absolutely.
And the criminal justice system, in my view, is the best way I can do that. I couldn't be a doctor. I don't like, all the blood and the gore, but I think we have a special opportunity in the criminal justice system, protect our community, to help individuals. When most people that I meet, they are in their lowest point in their life. They've just been arrested. They're charged with these crimes. There may be circumstances that are going to help them down the line, maybe to lessen it, maybe to get the case dismissed. But at the very beginning, that's not where you're at. So you meet folks at the worst time of their life, and you have to just day by day, figure out, okay, this is how you're going to cope with this. This is what we're going to do, whether it's evaluations or treatment. And if you can help one person through that, my opinion is, well, that's one less victim down the road, right?
Right.
If you can help somebody, individuals with DUIs, I talk about evolving, and, part of the domestic violence problem in my childhood was alcohol. And, you look at that and you're like, okay, if we can address what is the root problem of this alcoholism, right? Then maybe we can make a change. So, again, it's, my goal is to try to figure out what can we do, to make things better, to help people to move forward and get out of the criminal justice system.
Well, I have this conversation with parents all the time. It's like, what we need to figure out now is how do we move forward to put this behind you in a manner that lets you continue on with your life as best as possible, not to go back and do these things again, but to move forward on this. So it's
right. And
I think
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to talk about that's where expungement is key. When after you go to a sentencing, the judge in Kansas will tell you you have a right to expungement, but I think a lot of people don't understand that. It's not properly explained. So, I talk to my clients about, whatever the time frame is for that particular crime is you want to attempt to get this expunged. So when your criminal history, like if you're applying for a job, that it doesn't appear. Now, we know in some more extensive criminal background checks, it's going to appear, but on a job application, if you have that conviction expunged, you can put that you've not been arrested. So that's a way to move on as well, because we all make mistakes, right? There was probably plenty of things I did when I was a teenager and in college that I could have been in trouble for, and the goal is to be able to help people to move past that.
And we did do a podcast on expungement as well. If you want to go back and kind of look at our past episodes, I think it was Joy Springfield, out of Topeka on that, and she does do expungement festivals across the state. Actually, I think there's one coming up in Johnson County here, not too
because it's $195 in court costs was one that I recently did. That's a lot of money for some folks to be able to do that. So,
and I think there's some waivers in there that you get it in certain circumstances as well. Okay, so maybe going to be a new DA here in a year and a half or so. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk with us today. Hopefully everyone has a new insight on the role of prosecutor and the importance of local prosecutor, I guess, in avoiding societal collapse, but, in moving us forward as a society. We will put a link, if you want to get that over to us, to your campaign at the end of the podcast here. So people have to actually listen to us talk before they get that link, or they can just skip to the end. But thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. I really do appreciate it, Vanessa.
You're very welcome. Have a good day. Thank you.
We again want to thank our guest, Vanessa Riebli, for talking with us today. Hopefully everyone has a new insight on the role and importance of your local prosecutor in avoiding societal collapse and making sure that the society functions. Please check out her link if you're interested in supporting her for district attorney. And we hope that you will join us for the next episode of the Bail in the Midwest podcast.
For more information about Vanessa Riebli, please visit her on the web at riebliforda.com. That's RIEBLIFORDA. Join us again next time for the Bail in the Midwest podcast, hosted by Shane Rolf.